What's up, Conquerors? My name's Clumsy Goldfish, and I'm your go-to Age of Empires 4 YouTuber for content, gameplay, guides, and more. If you're interested in more content, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and enjoy this video. Thanks so much for watching. What's up, Conquerors? In today's guide, we're going to specifically talk about the Blacksmith. We're going to talk about melee upgrades, ranged upgrades, feudal, castle, imperial upgrades. I want to talk through what the technologies are, talk through them at each age. I also want to talk about unique blacksmith technologies per civilization, and in a broader sense with just the normal feudal, castle, and imperial blacksmith technologies. I want to talk about what technologies to prioritize and when, how effective the technologies are at different parts of the game, and also I think something people may struggle with is when do you actually build a blacksmith? You know, when is the right time to build a blacksmith and get said upgrade? So I want to talk through all those things today, and I think this will be a pretty helpful guide. If you have any questions after the guide about technologies, when to get them, when to build a blacksmith, anything I cover today, happy to answer those questions in the comments below. So let's get to it, and thanks for watching. What's up, Conquerors? In this part of the guide, I'm going to talk specifically about the basic blacksmith upgrades. And these blacksmith upgrades are available to all civilizations in the game. So there are basic blacksmith upgrades, there are unique blacksmith upgrades where one civilization may have an upgrade in the blacksmith that another does not. And I'll be honest, when I looked up the list, there's more than I thought. So I think this is actually going to turn into a really interesting and informative guide that'll help you out a lot. And then I kind of later want to talk about these blacksmith upgrades in practice, right? Like how they work with archers kiting or melee upgrades for horsemen hitting archers. There's a lot of things I want to talk about later about the practicality of these technologies and how they play out on the field that you wouldn't necessarily think about when you're just looking at the technologies at face value. How they work at face value and how they work in practicality really are quite different. So those are all things I'm going to cover in this part of the video, and I hope you'll stick with me through it. The beginning might be a bit boring, but I think this is going to be super informative and helpful. So first, we just have to start with our basic blacksmith upgrades, right? At feudal age, castle age, and imperial age, you have a basic blacksmith upgrade. I'm going to call them just melee and ranged upgrades because going through all of the names is a bit much. They all have different names. So the melee upgrades, you can get +1 melee attack or +1 melee armor. Ranged upgrades, you can get +1 ranged damage or +1 ranged armor. I'm kind of using damage and attack interchangeably here when I talk. So there's one of these upgrades available at each age, okay? And you can see that in the tooltip at the bottom here. Above the upgrade, there's a little icon and it shows essentially feudal age. This is the first iteration of the upgrade. You can get up to 3. Okay? So you have your +1 melee damage, +1 melee armor, +1 range damage, +1 ranged armor. If you research all of these in feudal, of course, you cannot research them until you get to castle age. So your +1, it's more frequently referred to as your +1's in feudal, your +2 is in castle, and your +3 is in imperial, even though each age they're only a +1. That's just how it's frequently referred to in the community. So generally these basic technologies, when you want to get them versus when you don't, it's really pretty simple here. Is the ranged upgrades are always more important, and I'll explain that more later. But if you're building a lot of archers, if you're building a lot of range units in general, you always want to get your +1 upgrades for your range damage. That's crucial. Okay? For instance, a feudal archer has 5 damage. So if you get +1 at the blacksmith for your feudal archer, that's a 20% increase in the damage that they had. That's going from 5 to 6. So that's pretty huge, right? And the other thing is, if you didn't get your +1 ranged attack and your opponent got their +1 ranged defense, then your archers would be doing 4 damage instead of 5. So there's a lot of... if you're not getting your upgrades and your opponent's getting them, it can tip the scale of a battle quite significantly, right? Especially, let's say, if your opponent was making men-at-arms and those already had 3 armor, and your archers were only doing 5 damage, that means your archers are only doing 2 damage to the men-at-arms, and then if they get their +1 ranged defense, then you're only doing 1 damage per archer. So then you need probably 120 archers to one-shot a man-at-arms. So it's pretty significant when you get these upgrades. So if you're building a lot of archers, crossbows, yeomen, longbows, any range unit that uses an arrow will benefit from this upgrade. Also important, town centers, towers, anything that's shooting arrows, keeps, arrow ships, they all use this blacksmith upgrade, and they all benefit from it. So, if you're an English player in your town center, those things are already Gatling guns. If you get this upgrade, your town center is going to even more effectively kill enemy units coming within range. So that's really important if you're going to use range units. Now, if you're using range units like hand cannoneers don't use arrows, so they will not benefit from this upgrade. That's just important to remember. Now, I almost always get, if I'm fighting in feudal, I almost always end up getting this +1 upgrade, because I normally have archers, right? I'll talk a little bit more about when to get upgrades based on age later. So the second, I would say this is the second most important, sometimes the most important upgrade that you can get in the blacksmith is your ranged armor. So for instance, if you're just making like knights and horsemen and men-at-arms and spearmen, let's say you're not making ranged units at all, you should always get this upgrade. This is huge. So if you're using knights in your raiding, one, it greatly enhances your ability to dive under town centers and survive under town center fire. Like if you get your feudal upgrade and your castle age upgrade, which we would call +2 ranged armor, you can basically dive under any town center in the game and just be fine. You can sit there and kill villagers, and the town center will not kill your armored units. If your opponent is using a lot of range units, you have to get this upgrade. If your opponent's just making spearmen, it's not necessarily a big deal. You don't have to get this upgrade. But if you're going to be diving under town centers or fighting against enemy range units, you need this upgrade. It's crucial. The next two upgrades, so I would say range damage upgrade and range armor upgrade are both very important. Like, these are super important upgrades if you're going into fights. You really don't want to take fights without these upgrades. It's just kind of a bad idea. The next two really aren't that important. Now, it's a little hard to explain why they're not as important, but the easiest example is, and there's a few examples I can give you, you have an archer and their total damage is 5. They shoot and they do 5 damage, 5 base damage. You get a +1 range damage, and all of a sudden they're doing 6 damage. That's a big increase. If you get +1 melee damage, and you have a knight that already does 24 damage when they, slice someone with their sword, +1 damage just doesn't do that much, right? Like, you're kind of looking at percentages there. Your +1 range damage for your archer is significant in their damage output, but for your knight, it's really just not that big of a deal. It's kind of the same thing with the melee defense. right? If a knight's already going to do 24 damage when they hit your spearman, getting +1 melee armor for your spearman just isn't that important. I'm not saying don't get these technologies, because I do get these technologies, especially when I have a large melee mass. They're just not as important as the ranged upgrades, because the range upgrades have a much higher impact on your armor and damage output. For instance, if a town center, and I'm making this number up because I don't remember off the top of my head, does 10 damage and your knight has a base 3 armor, the town center does 7 damage each time it hits you. Well, you know, you get 3 ranged defense upgrades, and then you have 6 armor, and then the town center's only doing 3 damage each time it hits you. That's a huge impact by getting these ranged defense upgrades. Versus, you know, if you're fighting knight on knight, these melee upgrades are important, but if the knight's doing 24 damage each time he hits you and 36 when he charges you with the lance, and you get all 3 melee armor upgrades, he's still doing 33 damage when he charges you with a lance, right? So the melee upgrades are good. They're just not anywhere close to as good as the ranged upgrades. One thing I'll also talk about later is choke points and how DPS works with your range units, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, again, why these ranged upgrades are so important compared to the melee ones. Now, those aren't the only basic technologies that are available. There are 2 other technologies available to most civilizations. One is siege engineering. Siege engineering allows your infantry to build battering rams and siege towers on the field. If you find a use for siege towers in the game, let me know, because no one makes them except just to cheese. But battering rams are, of course, quite useful. So, you know, if you're doing a feudal all-in push, you're going to have to get your blacksmith and at some point siege engineering so that you can build battering rams to bring down your opponent's buildings. Otherwise, you've got to build siege workshops in Castle Age, and the only way you can build rams in Feudal Age is by getting this technology, or you play Abbasid Ayyubid, which is different. Now, Military Academy is a sneakily good technology which becomes available in Castle Age. And basically all units are created 33% faster. So infantry, cavalry, siege, and transport units and buildings. So based on that description, doesn't apply to warships. But if you have, you know, barracks, stable, archer range, basic production buildings, then those units get created faster. And it's really a very good technology. One, because you don't have to build as many production buildings if you get this technology. You don't have to spend the wood building those production buildings, the idle time from your villagers building those production buildings. So it's really a pretty strong technology. You know, in-game you're building 10, 15 unit producers of each type, barracks, stable, archery range. So this really saves you on a lot of that building time and wood that it costs to build all those production buildings. So that's really kind of the core blacksmith technologies. And I am going to talk about later how these work in practice. You know, this is just kind of the technologies at face value, and now I'm going to hit the unique technologies, and then we'll really get to the meat of this guide, which is how do they work on the battlefield when you're microing around, when you're kiting, when you're fighting in choke points. Like, how and when do these blacksmith upgrades really matter? And in the end, that's the important part, right? So if you have any questions or disputes about how I feel about these technologies at face value, just let me know in the comments. And then let's get moved over and take a look at our unique technologies here. So let's take a look at our unique technologies. And I actually used a unit tester for this video, so shout out. I will put the modder's name in the description of this video, and maybe I'll just paste it in here for creating this unit tester. Super helpful for a video like this. And I know this looks like kind of a cluster of buildings, but trust me, there's a method to the madness. In front of each blacksmith, I have a civilian representative of each civilization to represent their unique blacksmith and their blacksmith technologies. So I want to actually talk about, and I didn't originally plan to do this, I just, looking at the blacksmith and all the technologies, thought it was crucial. I want to talk about unique civilization technologies in the blacksmiths, which I think is really cool, addition to the game. So first up, our representative, we have a Rus villager, as you can see him here with his hammer. The Rus, of course, have all the basic blacksmith technologies, and then they have a unique technology called Boyar's Fortitude. 150 food, 350 gold, but it increases the health of Rus cavalry by 25 and is available in the Castle Age. So as we know, our Rus players love spamming their horse archers and knights, so getting this upgrade in the Castle Age is huge for the Rus. You really want to get this upgrade before you're taking big fights with your cavalry. And where this upgrade becomes even better is, let's say you get this upgrade in Castle Age with plus 25 HP, and then you get Biology in Imperial Age, which increases the HP of your cavalry by a percentage. And so your base HP is already increased by 25, and then you get the University upgrade and Imperial, and it increases it by a large percentage. So your cavalry are tankier, your horsemen, your horse archers, your knights are tankier in Castle, and even it's like an extra buff again in Imperial. So really strong technology here that I like a lot. Our civilian representative for Zhu Xi Legacy is here. And this is a really strong upgrade that I think slept on a bit because it's really cheap. Is Dali Horses, 75 food, 175 gold. And Zhu Xi really excel at fast castle and leaning on their lancers when they go fast castle. And this increases the attack speed of cavalry units, which is their horsemen and their knights, or lancers, I think in this case. And later on, they can actually get several unique cavalry units, which I'm not going to dive into now. But increases the attack speed of the cavalry units by 20%, which is massive. Okay, that's like the English knights under their network of castles or citadels. Can't remember the exact name. But you've got a lancer that's hitting 20% faster. So let's say you're playing Zhu Xi against China. You both go pro scouts. You both go castle age. You both go knights. And then these guys pick up this technology, and their knights are hitting 20% faster. Yeah, they'll decimate you. So this is a really strong technology if you're playing Zhu Xi's Legacy at all, and you're using Lancers. You got to get this technology early. Our civilian representative of the Abbasid dynasty is here. And again, the basic technologies. The Abbasid and Ayyubid do not have siege engineering because they just have siege engineering as a civilization bonus. What's really cool about those civilizations is they can not only build battering rams in the field, but also springles, mangonels, and trebuchets. So the Abbasid unique technology is called Camel Handling, 75 food, 200 gold, and then increases the movement speed of camel military units by 15%. Pretty cool, but, it's really not that useful. I think it's cool, but... So our Ayyubid civilian representative here. At the Ayyubid blacksmith, they have the basic technologies, missing siege engineering because they already have it. And they have two very strong technologies in my mind. One is Sultan's Mamluks, which is 100 food, 250 gold. Infantry gain 25% damage and 20% movement speed for 10 seconds after defeating a unit. Infantry is a very broad category. So that's melee infantry and ranged infantry. It could be a hand cannoneer, an archer, a crossbow, a ghulam, a spearman. There's a lot of units that fall under this category, and let me read that again. When they defeat an enemy unit, They gain 25% damage and 20% movement speed for 10 seconds. That's pretty insane if you ask me, for 100 food and 250 gold. They also have infantry support, which I think is... This is pretty freaking strong. So I'm going to explain how these technologies can be used really well together. For 150 food and 350 gold unlocked in the Imperial Age, infantry increase the armor of nearby camels by 3. So one of the favorite Ayyubid units is the Desert Raider, which really has poor armor. But let's say you get this technology and you're massing Desert Raiders and you keep some infantry around, then those Desert Raiders, and I'm sure you'll use Camel Lancers, but increases the melee and ranged armor of nearby camels by 3. So let's say you had 4 armor. That takes you to 7. Let's say you had 3 base armor and you got your 3 armor upgrades in the Blacksmith, which took you to 6. And then you get this, you have 9. 9 armor. Good luck killing those camels. Very strong technology. Our Malian representative. We'll take a look at the Malian blacksmith here. All the basic technologies and also precision training, which is 150 wood, 350 gold, available in Imperial Age. This is pretty strong. I mean, I don't think it's nearly as strong. Ayyubid, in my mind, these are 2 of the strongest unique technologies, along with Dali Horses from Zhu Xi. Precision training's pretty nice. It increases range damage of Danzo, that's their spear throw, those are the spearmen, by +6, archers by +2, which again is really good for archers because their base damage is so low anyways. And javelin throwers by 3, they have higher base damage, so, but still pretty darn good. So really good Imperial Age upgrade. Archers always kind of fall out of favor in Imperial Age, but with poison arrows and this damage increase, their archers stay pretty legit in Imperial Age. Excuse me. Our Lancaster villager, which I know we probably all hate her because she's from House of Lancaster. They have their classic technologies. And they have a unique technology in Imperial Age called Padded Jack for 200 food, 500 gold. It equips your yeomen and spearmen with padded jacks, improving their melee armor by 3. So, I just don't think this technology is very strong because, like we were talking about earlier, the melee armor's nice. Is it really that good? No. +3 obviously is pretty good, but if you're making yeomen and spearmen in Imperial Age against elite knights, are the chances those knights gonna kill you pretty high anyways? Yeah. So, I mean, this is a good technology, but not a must-have. Our Delhi representative villager here. We'll check their blacksmith out. So, of course, Delhi is a little bit different. I have on cheats here, but it's a little bit different because they don't buy their technologies. Their technologies all come in for free, but at a slower rate depending on how many scholars you have. They have a really cool ability, which I don't think a lot of people are aware of or use very much. It's called Forced March. And of course doesn't cost anything, but takes some time to research. Infantry gain the Forced March ability. So that's any infantry range or melee, men-at-arms, archers, crossbows, hand cannoneers, spearmen. When activated, infantry move 100% faster for 10 seconds, but breaks when dealing damage. So a great example of when to use this is, let's say there's a pack of villagers running away from your archers. Boom, you hit Force Marched, you get in front of the villagers, you kill them. Or enemy armies running away, they don't want to engage you. Boom, you hit Force March, you catch up to them, you take an engagement. So, really cool technology that I never use as much as I should have at Delhi, but if you're a Delhi player, you should definitely be using that. And last but not least, our Byzantine villager, We should probably just make him make a cistern just because he's Byzantine, right? So their technology, they have the basic upgrades, and they also have teardrop shields available in Castle Age. 100 food and 250 gold. It increases the armor of cataphracts by 1, which cataphracts already have great armor, so that's huge. Move speed of their spearmen, Limitani, by 15%, also very strong, and attack speed of Varangian guards by 15%. I think this is super good technology. If you're Byzantine, you should be getting that pretty early in Castle Age. The one thing I want to point out about all of these unique technologies is none of them are available in Feudal Age, right? These are all trapped behind either Castle Age or Imperial Age locks. So if you're playing any of these civilizations, I definitely... There are some which are stronger than others, like Boyar Fortitude, really strong. Dali Horses, really strong. Both the Ayyubid technologies, crazy strong, man. Byzantine upgrade, pretty darn good. Malian upgrade's okay. Lancaster upgrade's okay. Abbasid upgrade, I'm not a big fan. Force March you get for free, so you may as well get it. So those are all the unique technologies in the game. Now, I didn't talk about some of the specific bonuses that technologies get for some civilizations. Like your Ottoman blacksmith is cheaper, and it has the radius, which increases military production rate. When you build your French blacksmith, you get the +1 melee damage for free. There's some other specific civilization bonuses out there with your blacksmith, which are really pretty cool. But this really hones in on the unique technologies. So I hope that was a fun little tutorial on the unique technologies. There's a lot of unique technologies you probably just don't know even exist, right? If you're not playing those civilizations, even if you are, you might be glossing over them or never really see them. So I hope that was a good and informative little breakdown of those. And then let's get into kind of the realistic look of how do these blacksmith technologies work on the battlefield. When should you be building blacksmiths? When should you be researching these? How it works with micro. And I think that'll be a good meat of the guide where you can learn a lot. So let's get to it. Alright, Conquerors, I want to do a really basic example here. I'm going to do a few basic examples of how much blacksmith upgrades can impact your fights on the battlefield. And this is really basic here of men-at-arms against archers, right? So if you look at an archer right now, they have 5 attack. An early man-at-arms has 3 defense. Okay, so they're going to do 2 damage per hit. So I have 15 men-at-arms against 35 archers. This is, of course, done without kiting, where in a real battle, the archers would be kiting, right? But essentially, I want to show if I'm in feudal and I get my +1 upgrade, how this fight changes, right? Right now, the archers have no +1 ranged damage upgrade. And see, they're just not dealing damage really at all against the men-at-arms, right? The men-at-arms are slicing through them. And even if you have archers and are kiting, eventually someone can build up a men-at-arms mass big enough if you don't have your ranged attack upgrade that they'll be able to take you out. So I'm going to show 2 examples here. This was kind of 15 base men-at-arms against 35 archers. The men-at-arms win. So now let's do... There were 9 men-at-arms living. So let's do 2 more examples of that. One where the men-at-arms have increased, or let's first do the archers with increased range armor. Alright, so we're pitting 15 men-at-arms against 35 archers again, but now the archers have +6 damage. So they've gotten their +1 upgrade from the blacksmith, which is steeled arrow. And again, they're not kiting. All I'm doing is attack moving. There's no micro going on at all on either side. And we can see here, there's still men-at-arms, right? So they are killing the archers, but the archers are doing significantly more damage than they were previously. Just from that +1 upgrade. And it's actually going to be interesting to see how close this is. This is going to go down to the wire. So you'd obviously win this fight in real life with the archers because you could kite, right? You probably would have won the first one. But it's a really good example of how impactful are these blacksmith upgrades? So, when I just put base men-at-arm against base archer, no upgrades, the archers lost. These are French archers against English men-at-arms, by the way, even though I realize the civs are a bit weird. There were 9 men-at-arms left before that +1 ranged attack went for the archers. Now the archers won, and there are 9 archers left. That's how impactful that upgrade was. And of course, the more archers you have, the more impactful it is. But you always kind of have to think about, like, your back line, your range units, or your DPS dealers. Your front line really is just to kind of stay alive, where your back line is your DPS dealers. So you always want to be getting the +1 range attack for your ranged units. And you always want to be getting the +1 ranged armor from your front line so that they can stay alive against these DPS dealers, right? It's really a pretty big deal, especially if, you know, Pink here had aged up and they had gotten +2 range damage, and Orange men-at-arms didn't have any increased range armor, then they would get absolutely shredded the next time. So that's like a very basic example I think you can carry over into your games of how impactful these blacksmith upgrades are. Especially the range damage and range armor. Why, if you're doing feudal units, you should always be building a blacksmith, right? So with the exception of Delhi and Ottoman, it's always more important to get units out first. That just makes sense. You get units out, then you get your blacksmith upgrades. But you want to get those upgrades semi-quickly. You don't want to be taking a lot of fights without your blacksmith upgrades. So if you're going in feudal, you're making units in feudal, whether you're going all in or just surviving or whatever, you get your blacksmith upgrades. If you're going fast castle, you normally don't build a blacksmith unless you're already aging up or you've aged up. A lot of the time, if I'm going castle, I'll build a blacksmith while I'm aging up. You get your ranged armor on the way or your ranged attack. That's the best way to do it. So, a lot of the time, fast castle, you don't have to prioritize the blacksmith, but if you're going feudal, you prioritize it. So, I'd like to show a couple more really good examples of why these blacksmith upgrades are so impactful. So, I'm going to pause for a second and then get some scenarios set up and show you guys how this works. So, here's a second scenario with 2 units that strike fear in all of us, which are Royal Knights versus ZHUNGE, both insanely good units. And again, the ZHUNGE do not have a range damage upgrade right now. The Royal Knights do not have any upgrades. And so we're going to see 5 Royal Knights against 20 ZHUNGE. Of course, the Knights are going to get a charge in. And none of this is going to be microed, so the ZHUNGE will not move. However, the ZHUNGE are known for their repeater blasts, so they do get good damage, but each knight has 3 armor right now, and each ZHUNGE does 4 damage. So right now, a ZHUNGE is only actually doing 1 damage when they don't have their ranged attack upgrade. So we'll see how this works. And you can see the knights not taking much damage from the ZHUNGE, right? As expected, they have 3 ranged armor. The ZHUNGE only have 4 attack, so right now in total, the ZHUNGE are only dealing 3 damage, basically per attack. You know, they have the burst attack, which I'm considering 1 attack here. So, easy cleanup, right, for 5 knights. Now, I'm going to add the +1 range damage bonus to the ZHUNGE, and then let's see how it changes. Alright, so part 2 of round 2, we have our 20 unsuspecting ZHUNGE now with their increased rain damage against our 5 royal knights, same base. So they have 5 damage now on their 3 burst attacks. So let's run it back. Again, no micro, and see the difference. Just attack moving. Look at how much easier the knights melt. It's just +1 range damage. But look at the difference that it makes. And if you were actually focusing with the ZHUNGE and kiting, you easily kill this force, right? So that's how much of a difference a technology which is 50 wood and 125 gold. It's that cheap, man. Either way, for your +1 range damage for the ZHUNGE or armor for the knights. And it completely changes the outcome of a fight. So I don't think a lot more needs to be said on that one, right? Range damage and range armor, the impact it has on battles is astronomically big. Especially those bigger battles. You have 40, 50 units. You don't have your blacksmith upgrades. And that goes for your feudal upgrades, your castle age upgrades. It doesn't really matter which ones you're getting as long as you're getting them. Like, before those big fights, you really have to have your blacksmith upgrades, especially for your cavalry and frontline units to survive against these range units. And then again, your range units to kill their frontline, right? Your range units are your DPS. They're your VIPs. Your range units need to deal all the damage, and your frontline just soaks it up. So that's why they're so important. Now, if we want to do a really interesting scenario here, we can again take our 20 ZHUNGE and our 5 knights and add a +1 melee damage to the knights and see if it really changes the outcome of things. So let's do that as our third test here. So here's another iteration of our test. And I know I'm doing a lot of unit tests here, but I just think it's helpful to show you in real time. Where our enemy ZHUNGE again have their +1, and now our knights have their +1 melee damage. Right? But again, like I was saying, if you're a ZHUNGE and you only do 4 damage to begin with 3 times, your +1 is pretty huge. That's giving you +1 damage on each one of your shots. Or if you're a Royal Knight, you do 19 base damage anyways. Now you're just doing 20 sword damage instead of 19. So, you know, does it really make a difference? I do like seeing that charge. Oh, that was a good charge they got this time too, though. It's actually going pretty good for him this time. It's gonna be close. They got a good frontline charge this time. I would say it made a difference, but of course, not as much as one would like, right? Especially if the ZHUNGE were kiting. So the next 2 examples I kind of want to go through and show where these blacksmith upgrades are really important and why the range ones are critical and the melee ones are really nice to have but not critical, is I want to talk about choke points and then town center dives. So I want to go through choke points and town center dives, and I think that'll be super helpful, and I'll set those up for us. Alright, so my next example, I'm going to show you how the battle works without a choke point and then how it works with the choke point. Okay? So I've got what I think, and I could be wrong here, so I might have to redo this, is what's going to be a pretty overwhelming force of knights. I have 20 knights against 10 spearmen, 25 archers, so the knights really should clean this up pretty effectively, right? So we're going to run this fight once, not in the choke point. Again, my knights do not have their ranged damage upgrade, the archers do. And then we're going to run it once in the choke point, and you can kind of see why the range, armor, and damage upgrades are so much more effective in areas like choke points, and I'll explain that more when we get to it than the open field. So, let's get to it. We'll see how it works in the open field, and then how it works with choke point. So spears do take the charge pretty effectively here, as you would expect, but there's just not that many spears, right? So anytime you're 1-to-1 knight versus spear or better, that's always a good engagement for you. We can see the knights easily clean this up. So I expect the knights to kind of win both of these fights, but we'll see. Because the choke point's going to be really effective, right? So how many knights? We lost 5 knights in that engagement. So let's queue up again, run it back with the choke point. Alright guys, so now we've got our choke point fight. Again, 25 archers, 10 spears against 20 knights. And I would really like in your mind for you to simulate this battle happening between buildings in someone's city. So let's say that, you know, this is the town center and a building and you're trying to defend and save your villagers who are on the wood line back here that the knights are all trying to kill. And again, what this really demonstrates in the core of what I'm getting to here is the melee damage upgrade in a choke point situation is not good. Because your melee units cannot, they do not have enough surface area to actually hit. The much stronger upgrade in this scenario is the range damage upgrade and the range armor upgrade, which the knights do not have. Right? So, let me actually add... Well, I think that's fine. The knights won't loop around too much. Because we're only going to be able to fit, what, 2-3 knights in here maximum? And the other knights will just be sitting at the back, even though I think the knights will still win this fight. But they'll be getting blasted, and their melee damage upgrade really does nothing, because they can't hit the opponent anyways. And that's why you see a lot of the time the front line really is just to hold back the opponents while you get your blacksmith upgrades to increase your damage from your ranged opponents. So again, we'll see how long the spearman can hold this choke point's the hard thing. But you see, we're in the situation here where the knights are just running around at the back, right? They can, only so many of them can attack at the same time. And the damage upgrades that they have really don't matter. So finally they break through the spears and get to the archers. Now if you had more spearmen here, you'd really successfully hold that choke point, right? There were 15 knights left last time, now there's 11. And if you step up the spear numbers, you hold that choke point even better. So there is something to be said for the melee armor upgrade in those situations, just because your spearmen can hold on a bit longer. But you could see that, what, they killed 4 or 5 more knights in that situation just because of the choke point. So that gets into a little bit of micro as well. Like when you're defending, you want to take good fights. You want to take choke point fights if you have more range units. And, you know, funnel those melee units into where they're getting stuck. They can't quite move around. Their pathing's all screwed up. And then you just kind of tee off with the range units. So the last thing I want to demonstrate is, actually, that's not a good town center for this. So I am going to demonstrate diving a town center and how much range defense improves your survivability under these town centers. So I am going to queue that up and do a couple scenarios of that. And then I really think that'll wrap up the video, unless I change my mind about doing some of the unique technologies, which would also be interesting. Maybe I'll do that. Let me set up these scenarios and we'll get to it. Alright guys, so I want to take you through town center diving and how important the range defense upgrade is for town center diving. I kind of regret that I wasn't able to get a capital town center in this scenario, but the Chinese town center, the hand cannon eats through armor, and I wanted to display arrow damage specifically, so I just used 2 secondary town centers for this demo. Garrisoned with villagers, of course, because that's where they will be. So I have a group of men-at-arms that do not have their ranged armor upgrade in feudal. And the town centers do have their ranged attack upgrade, which actually is very important against armored units diving your base if you're defending, is your ranged attack upgrade. But more importantly, if you're diving town centers with cavalry, which is normally what you're doing, or you're doing a men-at-arms spam, something like that, how ridiculously important your ranged defense upgrade is. Okay, because if you're doing men-at-arms, you're running around with men-at-arms, you're trying to idle all their villagers, like that's the goal, you're doing all this idling, all this great stuff. But you don't really have much staying power if you don't have your ranged defense. Okay? and you're going to use a lot more units. So I think this will be a pretty good demonstration. I'm going to do a test run with no range defense upgrade, a test run with +2, and then +3. Or sorry, +1, +2, +3, and we'll see the differences, right? And I think that'll be pretty eye-opening. So we just got to convert these guys, and then we're going to get a good little attack move in here. And let's see how well our men-at-arms, feudal men-at-arms do with no range defense upgrades. So obviously they have some good base armor, right? They can get in here and take some town center shots, and if you had a capital town center, it would be doing even more damage. And if you had a hand cannon slit town center from Zhu Xi or China, those things slap against armored units, let's just say that. So, you know, they could be attacking you here, you come out, you repair, then you go, oh, other side, you do it again, and you oh. And I mean, you can do this for a long time, right? And all the meanwhile, your town center's killing the enemy troops. So it's a really easy way to defend your base. And without the range defense upgrade, the men-at-arms really die pretty effectively, right? So I'm going to get these to repair up, and I'll get my range defense upgrade and show you how much more effective the men-at-arms are with that. Alright guys, so we got our men-at-arms with their very nice upgrade here. And let's run it back. So they now have 4 range defense instead of 3. And as we can see, at the end of the day, they are still early men-at-arms, right? So they are taking still some serious damage from the town centers. But you can see they're staying alive much longer, and at the end of the day, the name of the game is idle time here, right? So you can still pull out and do your little repair and all that good stuff. But anytime you're diving with feudal armored units and the +1 range defense upgrade, it's still kind of hard to idle out and really do the town center dives like you want, right? But in this third example where we hit castle when we have the +2 range defense, you're going to see where it really changes. Things really change in that scenario. And you can see even with me popping out and repairing a little bit, screwing around a bit, they still did some pretty significant damage for just 10 men-at-arms in idle time and damage to these town centers, which is pretty crazy. I didn't actually expect them to do that much torch damage. So I'm going to age up here and show you how extreme the difference is when you move from this +1 to this +2. And I think you're going to be pretty blown away by that as far as town center dives. Alright guys, so now we have our Castle Age men-at-arms with +2 range defense. So we've gotten our feudal and our Castle Age upgrade. And you're going to see how significant the difference is in your ability to dive a town center once you have this +2 upgrade. And so a lot of the time what you'll see people do is they'll hit castle. They'll be aging up to castle. They'll get their +1 range defense upgrade. They'll hit castle, get +2. And then they will dive your town center. And if you don't have units, there's nothing you can do about it. They will dive your town center and you're basically screwed. They'll split off units, you know, attack your villagers, burn your buildings. And it's very hard to deal with. So it's the same 10 men-at-arms, right? 10 English men-at-arms. Nothing special, just the +2 range defense upgrade. And now, they don't die. So before, they were kind of running in and dying and whatever. But I'm out here, you know, I can try to repair. They actually killed a villager there, which is kind of shocking. So, I can waste their time, but at the end of the day, once they've hit this +2 range defense in castle, they don't die, dude. So, these units can sit under the town center now for a really long time. And what's interesting, since this is a secondary town center, not your main that has 8,000, well, that's Templar, not your main that has 7,000 HP, they can actually now, with their +2 range defense, burn your town centers down to the ground if you do not have other units there to stop them, like crossbows or knights. spears and archers at this point really aren't going to be able to do much against these men-at-arms. Pretty incredible, right? So I think that's a pretty good demonstration of how insane the impact of +2 range defense is if you've gotten that before your opponent's gotten +2 range attack. It just shows how powerful these blacksmith upgrades are for ranged attack and ranged defense. So that's really the bulk of the video. I'm going to do a little special section at the end here where I look at unique upgrades, because I think that's going to be pretty cool. And do some unit testing with the unique upgrades. So if you want to stick around for that, like, please do. I think this is going to be really interesting. I'll do some unit testing with the unique blacksmith upgrades. But as far as your just basic blacksmith upgrades, basic blacksmith guide, that's really how it all works, right? You have your +1 melee damage, +1 melee armor, +1 range defense, +1 melee defense. And that's really kind of how it works in practicalities there. So I hope all that information was super helpful. The video went much longer than I thought it was going to. I thought it was going to be 10 minutes at first, but there's so much content you can make on this. So I hope you stuck around and learned a lot from this video. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, just let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like. If you learned something, subscribe to the channel. If you want to support the channel and continue to see videos like this, click the join button below the video. And thanks for watching.